Good afternoon. How are you guys doing? A little late start today, but I wanted to get in some education before the day is over. So for those of you guys that are able to join me, I really appreciate it. All right, so want to get to some fundamentals for those of you guys that are working on your skills and you want to get better at acrylic application. I want to be able to focus on a couple things, the upper arch, and then points of filling. Okay, so what I'm talking about is, all right, so let's assume that this is the nail, all right? So obviously here, and then we're looking at it from the side profile as well, right? We want to try to create, right, if this is the natural nail, we want to try to create a really nice upper arch, right? So it obviously has to be thin, right, towards the back, flush towards the back, and then there's some volume towards the center as you're building out your shape, right? We want to try to create this, right? Right, so how do you do that without, again, having to think too much? So one of the things you're going to notice is when I set the purl down to the back end, right? If the finger is pointed down, okay? So if assuming that this is the natural nail and the finger is pointed down, when we set the bead down to this point, we have to set it with the tip of the brush behind the bead, right? So as we're setting the brush down, right, we want to be able to set it down so that when we start to press behind, everything starts to flow this way, right? So I don't want you to shape it with your brush as the product is running this way. I want you to be able to set it down and focus the tip of your brush around the cuticle area so that as the product starts running down towards this part, right, say the stress area or towards the very, very front of the free edge, we want this to shape naturally, okay? So what does that mean? That means that when we are practicing, okay, I'm gonna use some Cover Pink. What we want to be able to do is we want to be able to go ahead and remove this drawing out of the way so it's not distracting, okay? But what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to create a natural flow, okay? So one of the things I always focus on, especially with a lot of my students who are beginning, is when you set the purl at the cuticle, you first of all have to make sure that you have right placement. Okay, this is not right. So if you pick up a bead, and you set it where the brush is pressing from the front of the bead, you can see what ends up happening. It starts to bulge out towards the edge, and then there's not going to be any run. So it looks like I just created kind of a mushroom cap on top. That's not what we want to be able to do. We'll go ahead and poke this off before it dries. Okay, so what we want to be able to obviously create is a self-leveling kind of purl that it's going to start moving towards the free edge. And in order for you to be able to create that, you have to have the right consistency. So obviously, I'm going to go ahead and smooth that out. I'm going to submerge my brush. I need to get a lot of liquid. You can see the angle that I'm picking up at. I'm not like this or dragging. What I am doing is I'm bouncing into the, you see the divot that I create right here. And then when I lift up my finger, or excuse me, my brush, you can see that the bead is on one side of my brush. Okay? So again, submerge my brush and then bounce, bounce, bounce. It's on one side of my brush. I'm going to count 1, 2, 3 count, right? So just to start, I want to show you something. Like you can see if I'm just barely, again, if I'm setting this down and I'm getting it to run, take a look at the side. Okay, I want to be able to show you something. As it starts to run down, you can see if I'm using the tip of my brush just to push here. Do you see how it naturally starts to shape? Okay, I'm not going to brush this through. I just want to show you that as the thickness starts to run down towards the free edge, this part, right? So again, what we're trying to create is, if this is the natural nail, right? If this is the natural nail right here, we want to try to create this, correct? Right? This thickness at the stress area. And we want to try to keep this as flush as we can around the cuticle area. So you're not going to be able to do that by using your brush and manipulating it. It has to be a natural flow from the tip down to the front, right? So you'll notice on this nail right here, okay, I'm not going to go ahead and prep it. I'm just going to go ahead and use the nail that we've created. If I was to submerge my brush and get a bead bounce, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then I'm using the tip of the brush just to kind of work around. So you can see how I'm literally kind of pushing. What ends up happening is it gets to a point, right? So it's the bead is gonna naturally drop, right? The bead is gonna naturally drop about 1/4 of an inch down the nail, right? So again, from the side profile, you can see how it's starting to shape, right? Starting to shape that feature that we want on all the enhancements that we create. Now, again, the sides right here, I'm not really concerned about that. I'm not trying to build out a nail right now. I'm just trying to show you the flow and how the product will naturally create the upper arch as you're working. Okay, so for those of you guys that are learning, you know, in order for you to get this down, it doesn't matter if you're sculpting or you're building on top of a tip, you have to be able to get that flow down. So let me show you what ends up happening when you have the right flow. Okay, like this is a little bit longer of a nail. Let's say I wanted to get it to flow all the way down to the tip. Well, I would have to use more powder and I'd have to use more liquid. Bounce, 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 bounce. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then around 5, I press and I start to use the tip of my brush 1/4 inch down. Like you can see how everything really starts to flow. Now, once it gets to the point where it stops, then I could use the tip of the brush and just kind of start feathering. I'm really showing you where I'm feathering, right? I'm using the tip of the brush and I'm kind of feathering from the corner and the sides to the front to kind of drag it down and through that kind of that hollow area that's missing. Then as it starts to set, I can start to use the body of my brush to kind of really maneuver this into place. Even though I don't have enough here, it's not a big deal because you can see as I start to smooth out the product with the body of my brush, right, everything really starts to come into perfection, right? So again, from the side profile, what I'm trying to create is that natural shaping of the upper arch, right? The sides, right, as when you take the tip of your brush and you set it down to the cuticle area, I think a lot of beginners make the mistake of trying to press it too firm around the back end. What you want is a consistency that's going to move. So, right, when I set this down, you can see from the side profile, right? So if I was going to set this down, let me try to give you guys a really good side view here. Let me lower the camera so I can show you what this looks like. Okay, right here. Okay, so from the side profile, you're going to notice the angle of my brush when I set this down, right? I'm not I'm not like setting it with my brush flat or trying to push this out to this area. That's going to be wrong. What I need to do is I need to make sure that when I'm setting this down, right, bounce, 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 you can see, like, take a look at this, right? Look at that where I'm setting it and I'm basically, boom, releasing. You see that? So like it's very thin around the edges where I'm going to be able to use the tip of my brush to walk around, right? I can't see the other side, but I'm just giving you guys a side profile view so you can see what it looks like when I'm setting it down. Again, you can see when I'm actually picking up the bead, right? So look, oops, sorry, I was trying to give you guys a better view. You can see if I submerge my brush, bounce, 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 right? Look at like how I'm, like you can see that when I'm setting this down, a lot of the bead is in front of the brush when I'm releasing. Right? That makes a huge difference. That way the product is flowing down towards the tip instead of getting stuck. Okay, so let me go ahead and remove this and we'll go ahead and get through an actual build out of a nail. It's the only problem when you're working on a video or a live video, kind of get it all over the place. Okay, go ahead and set my brush here for a second. Let me go ahead and get myself back into good view. All right. So again, you know, if we're just building nails and we're trying to create some sort of structure, then what we want to be able to create is a form. And I don't care if you're what do you call it? Gluing a tip on or sculpting. The most important technique in all of acrylic and gel application is the overlay. The overlay is the most important because you have to get the product to flow. You have to understand that the product has to flow from the cuticle to the free edge in the least amount of effort, right? So if I was working on a nail like this, I'm not going to prep anything. I'm just showing you guys flow motion, right? Flow motion instead of slow motion. Crack myself up. All right, so go ahead and get a form. And then, you know, again, if I'm just practicing building and I don't care what length you're building your tip. For those of you guys that are also starting, you can see how I kind of cut like just a wedge, and that you can line up the tip that way. Okay, so if I take my brush and then I pick up a bead and I dab out all the excess, when I set this to the form, I'm not going to get this to run anywhere. And then I could use the body of my brush to walk it from the very top because I'm walking it from the top. And I think for all of you guys that are starting right now, you have to understand that when you're actually building acrylic on the tip, you want clay-like consistency. So in order for you to get clay-like consistency, you have to be able to drain the bead. You cannot drain the bead when you're working on the nail plates because you need that self-leveling nature so the product starts to move from this point to this point, okay? So I created something as long as the nail that we're building on. Now here's the thing, right? I need to make sure that when I'm setting this down to the cuticle area, like we were explaining, when I set it down to this point right here, I need the product to run here. So press, 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 press. I'm kind of pressing it from this corner, right, all the way around the edge to about this corner. And then as the product starts to run down naturally, where I'm pulling initially from is the corner. And then from the front of the bead and then the corner, right? So it's like the very front end of the bead and then the front of the pearl so that I create that natural arch all the way down. So if I submerge my brush, let's go ahead and get ourselves, again, something big enough where I'm going to be able to work on a nail that's this big. But if I submerge and I bounce, 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 right? And I get myself a big bead and I count 2, 3, 4, and then 5, boom, and I release it. I use the tip of the brush just to kind of walk around the edge. Then I'm going to notice, okay, I need to start pulling from here, from the front, right, from the front corners. And then you can see I'm just kind of feathering down, allowing the product to continue to move towards the front of the nail. So you can see how everything is tapering down towards the tip. I'm not trying to get a full overlay on the whole entire nail. Where I'm really pulling is from the front end of the bead as it starts to move real slow motion. You can see where I'm actually starting to pull. Now look from the side, right? Again, like if I start to pull everything down towards the side, everything gets tight here. You can see that I'm building, right? That arch is shaping by itself. The arch is shaping by itself. So the area that needs to be filled in is just that front end of the free edge, right? Everything is going to be nice and tapered around the edges. All I would need to do is get another bead, right? So again, at this point, if I don't want it to run, I can go ahead and dab it. Why? Because I'm applying it on top of acrylic. I could set it in between the acrylic I applied and the tip, and I could brush back. What it does is it leaves enough acrylic on the front where if I'm using the body of my brush, I'm going to be able to work that excess down onto the free edge that I've created, right? And what this is going to do is going to fill in all the space necessary for me to create the perfect shaped nail, right? So again, it doesn't matter whether you're sculpting. You can see I needed to walk product up, so I'm walking it from the body all the way through. I need to create the right thickness, right? And again, if it's thicker in some areas, I could care less. What I know is I'm going to be able to use my electric file, my hand file, to file this into perfection. You can see from the side, right, as I'm working through, right, all these, right, so taper in that back edge with my electric file, barely touch through here. I can touch through here. You can see that my extension, when I'm building it from the edge of the growth channel all the way out to the very, very tip, this is going to be a solid nail that I'm going to be able to sculpt. And again, like it's not about trying to make it perfect right off the start, but I have room to file. You can see that if I was going to take the edge of my wand and I line it up to the edge, I have room to file it really, really straight right there. I have room to file it really straight right there. And obviously I have enough thickness on that free edge to be able to shape. Okay. So I hope that helps. Again, the purpose of me coming live is to get into as much detail as I possibly can so that you understand, especially for those of you guys that are learning how to do this. You have to allow the product to self-level. It has to move. Creating that upper arch has nothing to do with using the body of the brush and sculpting that into shape. The bead has to move. The bead has to shape itself. Where you pull is from the corners in the front. If you don't have a big enough bead, it doesn't matter because you're going to be able to fill in that space with the blending bead or whatever flat space you have. As long as the cuticles are tight, as long as you understand the product has to self-level into perfection to create that natural arch, it's going to set you up for a great nail where you're going to be able to shape into perfection. All right. Hope that helped. If you guys have any questions, hit me up. Always here to help you guys, and look forward to seeing you soon. I'll be in on Monday for the Slick Pour class. So for those of you guys that are attending, looking forward to seeing you then. Have a safe weekend. I'll talk to you guys soon. Have a good one. Peace.